teacher friends, it's Dr. Dickenson. Thanks so much for checking out my channel. In this two-part video series, I will be discussing the key components for RICA Subtest 2, which includes comprehension and vocabulary. If you've checked out my other RICA videos, then you know I've discussed how to prepare for this test and what you need to do to be successful. Remember that this test is more than just an assessment of your content knowledge on teaching reading. It is also a time test and requires you to respond to constructive response questions using critical thinking and analysis and application of the classroom. In part one of this two-part series, I talked about vocabulary, the academic terms that you need to know, and I've also gone over test questions that you may see on your test. In this video, I'm just going to take a really close look at all aspects of reading comprehension. Since there's so much, I'm only going to focus on the key things that you need for the RICA. I will also talk about strategies to support diverse learners, academic terms that you need to know, what should you do to support English language learners, as well as struggling readers. And we'll take a deep dive into factors that affect reading comprehension. Before we get started, don't forget to hit the like, subscribe button, leave a comment, let me know what else you'd like to see or any questions that you have. And be sure to share this video with your teacher friends. Remember that mastery happens with repetition and practice. So watch the video again till you achieve automaticity. Thanks so much, and I'll see you soon. Comprehension is the ultimate goal of reading. Without comprehension, reading is just that mechanical process of decoding words without understanding their meaning. And that is why it's really important to know the research behind reading comprehension. So these strategies are going to help your learners grasp the explicit content of texts, infer deep meaning and make connections, critically analyze and evaluate information, and become proficient, right? Because we all want to support our students in becoming lifelong readers. So for the RICA, you'll need to know about the 3 levels of reading comprehension. And we're going to take a deep dive into them. Literal, which is reading the lines, what's literally on the text. Inferential, making inferences, reading between the lines. And evaluative, reading beyond the lines. Let's get started by talking about literal comprehension. Literal comprehension is the basic understanding of the text. This is where you start in most TK1 classrooms, right? This is where the reader is able to grasp both that explicit or directly stated information. It will involve having your students recognize facts, identify meaning ideas, understand sequence, first, next, then, finally, being able to take note of details, and comprehend straightforward meanings within the text. So some of the key elements of literal comprehension is, again, recognizing those facts. So specific details or pieces of information that are directly stated in the text. Understanding main ideas. What is the primary message or central point of a passage or text, right? Understanding sequence. What are the order of events and steps? And then noting some details like dates, names, relationships, descriptions, things like that. And they will also need to be able to comprehend explicit meanings, definitions, descriptions, and directly stated ideas without inferring beyond what is written. Now, if you're wondering what are some strategies for developing literal comprehension, you want to make sure that you are questioning your students, right? Who's the main character? Where does the story take place? And guiding your students using think aloud strategies to identify that explicit information. With older students, you can use things like highlighting and annotating. So encouraging your students to underline or highlight main information and take notes in the margins. Another strategy for developing literal comprehension is summarizing. We can have our students summarize paragraphs or sections, sequencing events. This is really popular with K2. You can have them arrange events in order. Sometimes you'll do that with pictures or images, and they can sequence what happened in the story, like Little Red Riding Hood. And then they can do a retelling. And graphic organizers. Comprehension is so much more helpful for our students. I wish I had more graphic organizers when I was a kid. And we'll explore some graphic organizers today. But with literal comprehension, we're going to be using graphic organizers to support our students finding this information. So an example activity, for questioning, like the text might say, the cat sat on the mat, the dog barked at the cat, and the cat ran away. Questions might be, who sat on the mat? What did the dog do? And what happened to the cat after the dog barked? Of course, I'll have my text in front of me so I can help my students point to where they would find that information. Let's talk about inferential comprehension. This is, again, where we go beyond what's on the surface, getting our students to think what's in their head, and it is the ability to understand information that is not explicitly stated in the text. This involves our students reading between the lines, making predictions, drawing conclusions, and interpreting implied meanings based on evidence and reasoning, okay? So we want our students to use their prior knowledge experience and, think critically. Some key elements of inferential comprehension, as stated here, is making predictions. We can think about what will happen next based on what we already know in the story. Drawing conclusions. In this element, students are going to be combining details from the text with their prior knowledge to form judgments or conclusions. Interpreting implied meanings. They need to understand that meanings that are suggested but not directly stated in the text. Students will also be understanding cause and effect. They should be able to identify relationships between events or actions and their outcomes. And again, this may not be explicitly outlined, right? We need to help our students make those connections. And finally, with our upper elementary, we can start helping our students recognize themes. So if they're reading a story, they should be able to identify like the overarching theme, like they're reading the book The Outsiders. And there could be several themes like friendship, loyalty, sense of belonging. And so the students are going to make those connections to really convey deeper meanings or insights. And again, strategies, questioning our students, these types of questions tend to be more open-ended. Like, for example, why do you think the character acted that way? Graphic organizers. We'll talk and look at some like story maps, cause and effect charts, or inference charts that help our students organize their thoughts and make connections. And we also want to do lots of think alouds. For example, I might say to my students, I wonder why the author described the setting this way. And finally, just like vocabulary, we always want to make connections to our prior knowledge. We want to make sure that our students are thinking about their own experiences, other texts that they've read, and even world events, books, songs, movies, to make inferences and make those connections. And finally, another strategy for developing inferential comprehension is group discussions. We could do a Socratic seminar. We can have our students work in small group, analyzing the text. And we want our students talking and using the academic language. All right. So a quick example, the text might say, Julia sighed as she looked out the window at the pouring rain. Her new bicycle sat unused in the garage. So we can ask our students, why did Julia sigh? What might Julia be feeling about the rain? And how would you feel if you were in the house and couldn't use your new bicycle? All right. And let's talk about our final type of comprehension here that you need to know for the RICA. It is evaluative comprehension. Now, This is where our students are going to be making judgments. Think of Judge Judy, right? We're evaluating if that's your favorite show. Evaluative comprehension involves critically analyzing and assessing the content of a text. Students are required to make judgments about the text quality, effectiveness, credibility, and the author's intentions. Okay, again, you're thinking like a judge. This particular level of comprehension goes beyond understanding and inferring meaning to include evaluating the text based on personal, ethical, and logical criteria. So, some key elements as stated here is assessing the credibility, right? Is this a reliable, trustworthy source? Okay, think fake news. Judging quality and effectiveness. So, students should be evaluating how well the text achieves its purpose. Did it persuade you, right? Including the quality of the arguments, evidence, as well as the writing style. In this type of comprehension, we also want our students to analyze the author's intention, understand why the author wrote the text and what they are trying to achieve. Compare and contrast, comparing the text to other works, ideas, or personal knowledge. To evaluate, though, okay? Not to make personal connections, but to evaluate its uniqueness or effectiveness. And then forming opinions and arguments. We want our students to be able to develop personal responses to the text, supported by evidence and logical reasoning. All right. So now, some of the questions that we might ask our students with evaluative comprehension is, do you find the author's argument convincing? What evidence does the author use? What might be the author's purpose in writing this editorial? And what is your opinion on the issue, and how does this editorial influence your views? All right. So now that we've had an opportunity to really think about types of comprehension, let's talk about instruction for reading, okay? Now, before you even get started with reading, you want to do some prior instruction. It's really important, as I shared in the vocabulary video, that you want to always activate your students' prior knowledge. Some ways that you can do that is by doing a KWL chart, as shown in this example. Stories about ladybugs, and the students maybe are reading informational text, want to activate their prior knowledge. What do we already know? And what do we want to know? And then after the reading, you can go back and record, what did you learn? We can also do brainstorming. This is where students brainstorm ideas related to the topic of the text. And we can do things like previewing the text with a text walk, also called a book walk. This is where we guide the students through the text. We look at titles, we look at headings, we look at pictures, and any other visual elements to kind of get an overview of the text. What do you think the text is going to be about? And finally, what we can also, when we preview the text, we can make predictions, right? We can have our students predict about what the text is going to be about based on the book walk. So just a few strategies, things that you can do before the reading. All right. Some additional strategies for pre-reading include questioning. We can pose questions that students can keep in mind while reading. I want you to pay attention to what the ladybugs do every day. And then that's going to help us based on some of the questions that we activated in our KWL chart. We can also clearly state the objectives for the reading assignment. Remember, boys and girls, that we're reading an informational text. So we're looking for evidence about the ladybugs' lives. Finally, another pre-reading strategy is to pre-teach that key vocabulary. So as a classroom teacher, you're going to want to do your own book walk and highlight some of the critical vocabulary that students will need to be able to understand the text, or perhaps words that appear quite often that they will need to know. And we can also use word maps, and this will help our students understand and remember new words. So, when we teach our vocabulary, we can employ a variety of vocabulary strategies. That's just morphology, where we break up that word into its root, prefix, and suffixes. We can use a word map to think of words that are similar, that have those similar parts. And then we can help our students build their schema for learning a new word. So, pre-teaching that vocabulary, setting out purpose for reading, all essential strategies for pre-reading. All right, so let's talk about during the reading. What are you going to be doing during the reading to support reading comprehension? The first strategy is called question classification, answer verification. In this type of strategy, what we're going to be doing is classifying the types of questions that will help our struggling readers who may have perhaps poor inferential and comprehension skills. Again, we're going to help our students with those comprehension skills by thinking about the types of questions. Like if I ask my students, why do you think the ladybugs shed their skin? And perhaps that information is not on the surface. I'm going to model for my students, okay, boys and girls, this is the type of question that we're going to make an inference based on the evidence, based on what we're reading, so that we can understand what is not on the surface. And remember, this process is to challenge our students to think about if the answer will be in the book or in their head. So if I'm asking my students, who are the characters in the story? 3 little bears. That is a literal comprehension question. So I want to tell my students that when I ask you who are the characters, that's a kind of question that we can find by reviewing our text. It is a literal comprehension. And you can definitely use those words with your students so that they can remember what strategies they should be using. The next approach is called question-answer relationship, or QAR. This is a kid-friendly approach that includes 4 types of questions. First one is write their answers, which is literal. Second one, think and search, which is an answer that is in the text but in different parts. The third type of question is author and you, which is not in the text. You need to think about what you know and what the author said. So in that instance, kids are going to be inferring and evaluating. And then the fourth type of question is called on my own. Students should be able to answer without reading the story. They will be able to infer and evaluate. The third instructional strategy that you can use during the reading is called strategic reading. These are explicit strategies that you teach and use throughout the reading, such as visualizing, paraphrasing, clarifying, predicting, generating questions, summarizing, and adjusting reading rate. So, as teachers, we want to be explicitly modeling these strategies. For example, at this point in the story, I am going to visualize what is happening so that I can understand why Harry Potter is upset. So that will allow me to really think about the evidence and what's happening in the story through visualizing. Perhaps you can have your students paraphrasing, who can paraphrase what has happened in the story so far. Or you could ask a clarifying question. What do you think the Little Red Riding Hood thought the wolf was her grandmother? And finally, the last strategy is called reciprocal teaching. This particular approach follows the gradual release of responsibility model. And this is where students are going to be predicting, generating questions, clarifying, summarizing, and the teacher will model each of these strategies. And then over time, the students will assume more and more responsibility. Again, it's a gradual release. For example, let's pick one strategy like predicting. I'm going to model how to use it. I'll do a strategy such as thinking aloud. Then I will have my students work in small groups where they will practice the skill of predicting. All right, so now that we've talked about these strategies that you can use during the reading, let's talk about after the reading. Now, after the reading, we can have our students make connections with the text. This is what it's all about, right? And is what will help our students with recall. First, we can have our students think about what the text reminds them of. Text to self. What the text reminds them of in terms of other books or TV shows, movies that they've read. And then finally, students can make a text to world connection where they connect what they're reading to real world events or issues. So this is what happens after the reading. And again, this is important to remember. Text to self, making connections to my own experiences. Text to text, making connections to other things that I've read or watched. And text to world, making connections to the world and real what's happening. Now, graphic organizers are a powerful visual tool that we should definitely be employing to help our students organize their ideas. They can be used in a variety of different ways to clarify or simplify complex concepts, for support with vocabulary, problem solving, or decision making, as well as for writing and brainstorming ideas and planning research. Now, when we talk about Venn diagram, it is a graphic organizer with two interlocking circles, and it is used to identify differences and similarities. So students can be comparing and contrasting two different stories that they've read, thinking about similarities and differences. It can also be used to compare and contrast two characters. And these tools can be useful for helping our students not just thinking in comprehension, but also in writing. A story map is a graphic organizer that helps students learn the elements of a narrative. For example, learning to identify a story's characters, plot, setting, problem, and solution. And students can also be exposed to different kinds of story maps. For example, one of the most basic ones that we use with our littles is a story map that includes beginning, middle, and end. However, as we get to upper elementary and middle school, we want to use more sophisticated organizers that focus on story elements like plot, character development, or theme. All right, let's talk about summarizing. This is an important instructional strategy that you can do after the reading. And just be mindful that a summary is a condensed version of an original text. And they are typically a paragraph long. And perhaps even a few paragraphs, depending on the length of the work that's being condensed. We definitely want to make sure that our students are writing summaries. You can use a writing journal, or you can have your students work collaboratively to write summaries and analyze texts. For our littles, we can also use oral summaries, where students are orally summarizing the text to a partner, or we can use this as an assessment of their being able to retell a story and their comprehension. All right, now that we've talked about some of the key components of comprehension, I want to just touch upon some other areas that involve comprehension. Our students need to have a strong grasp of the different types of sentences. So be familiar with the 3 different types of sentences. You will see questions on the RICA One type of sentences that you should be familiar with is a simple sentences. This simple sentence has one independent clause. And remember, independent means it can stand alone. So the independent clause will also include a subject and a predicate. For example, and I do have a bunny, my bunny, which is the subject, chews on our cords, which is a predicate. And yes, unfortunately, that happens quite a bit. A compound sentence is a sentence joined together by a comma and a conjunction. As illustrated here, my bunny chews on cords, comma, and books. And finally, a complex sentence has one independent clause and one dependent clause that begins with a subordinating conjunction. My bunny sleeps on the couch while I watch a movie. All right, so let's talk about idioms. Idioms are really important for us to explicitly teach in our classroom. An idiom is an expression that holds a different meaning than its literal meaning. Not to be taken literally. I'm going to call it a night. And what I often hear, don't sweat the small stuff. Or once in a blue moon. So it's important for us to be explicitly teaching what the idioms mean and providing opportunities for our students to differentiate the literal and the inferential meaning of idioms. You can even have your students create their own idioms. That is so much fun. My kids love to do that. Now, for our English language learners, you probably can tell this could be an area of difficulty because their meanings are unpredictable. So we always want to make sure that we're, just like our vocabulary, providing multiple exposures and opportunities to practice. And then we're going to be providing different games and ways for our students to just make sense, have that word consciousness. So we can use idioms as part of our class discussion. We could do an idiom a day, keeps the doctor away. No fun there. And play a matching game with idioms in their meetings. Hey, that happened off the cuff. I'm pretty impressed. Let's talk about different types of genres that you should be familiar with. First, expository or informational text. This includes how-to articles, like step-by-step instructions, news articles, which report on events and facts, hopefully without bias. Could be an opinion article, though. Textbooks, which provide detailed information on a subject, encyclopedia entries, and that includes concise and factual information. So Wikipedia might be out as well as Asiri. And this should really just giving your students exposure to a wide range of topics. Scientific reports and essays. All right. Some different types of text that you should be familiar with. First is a narrative text. Now, you may have be familiar with some of the narratives I've already talked about, like Little Red Riding Hood. A narrative text tells the story. It can also be fiction or nonfiction. They typically have a beginning, middle, or end, and they use characters, setting, and a plot to create a story. Let's talk about descriptive texts. These particular types of text creates a picture with words using vivid language to describe people, places, things, or events. They can be found in a variety of genres, including essays and poetry. Next, we'll talk about expository text. Expository text, like the picture shown here, explains or informs by presenting facts, definition, or processes in a clear and concise way. They can be found in a variety of genres, including textbooks, news articles, social studies books, science books, informational books for children. And finally, procedure or informational text. This explains how to do something, okay? Think of like cookbooks, Lego kits. And they often include diagrams, illustrations, or photographs. And finally, argumentative or persuasive text, just like it states, tries to persuade the reader to agree with a particular point of view. Like we need to get rid of homework. Remember writing that when you were a kid? But make sure you're using evidence, logic, and reasoning. Otherwise, it's not going to fly. Argumentative text can be found in essays, editorials, and speeches. So now that we've talked about the different kinds of text, the different types of reading comprehension, let's do some questions and do a quick check. Which of the following strategies is most effective for teaching students to make inferences while reading? A, encouraging students to read silently and independently. B, teaching students to identify and analyze text evidence. C, having students summarize the text in their own words. Or D, asking students to focus on decoding unfamiliar words. All right, remember when we're doing the RICA, we want to see which questions are obviously wrong. So we're not teaching decoding. We can definitely get rid of D. We're asking our students to make inferences. So if I'm asking my students to make inferences, then having them just read silently and independently is not going to do that. That leaves me with B and C. Now, again, the strategy is to think about which of these choices is most effective. That's what the question is asking us, most effective for teaching students to make inferences. In that case, having a summary is a great strategy to do after the reading, but I want to make sure that my students are making inferences while they're reading. So in that case, it would have to be B. All right, great job. Let's look at our next question. An ELL student has difficulty understanding academic vocabulary in a science text. Which of the following strategies would best support this student? Okay, again, focus here is understanding academic vocabulary in a science text, and we're looking for strategies to support. What do you guys think? Is it A, provide a glossary of terms in the student's native language? B, have the students write sentences using the new vocabulary? C, pair the students with a peer tutor who speak the same native language? Or D, use visual aids and real-life examples? Now, we're talking about English language learner. We're talking about how we can provide opportunities for our students to understand. That being said, I'm definitely going to get rid of A because just giving them a glossary of terms is not going to support them in understanding, nor will B. Having a peer tutor who speaks the same language. Now, this is a strategy that's often used for students to understand the language and understand to make sense of what the questions are, but it's not going to be a good strategy for understanding academic vocabulary. So I'm going to be using D, visuals and real life examples. All right. Next question. An ELL student struggles with understanding the sequence of events. Man, that's literal comprehension, right? Which instructional strategy would be most helpful? Is it A, using a graphic organizer like a story map to visually represent the sequence? B, asking the students to rewrite the story in their own words? C, having the students listen to an audio version of the story? And D, providing a list of vocabulary words from the story. Okay, so again, the question is asking us, how do we support an English language learner with the sequence of events? And obviously, D is not going to help them with sequencing. C will not help them with sequencing either. I can read the story. It's not going to make a huge difference there. Having them rewrite the story in their own words, that's summarizing, but it's not anything to do with sequencing. And letter A has the word sequence, so it must be, and it is, A, using a graphic organizer. Okay, a teacher observes that students often skip unfamiliar words while reading. Which strategy should the teacher use to improve student vocabulary and reading comprehension? Is it A, teach students to use context clues to infer the meaning of unfamiliar words? B, assign additional reading passages with simpler vocabulary? C, have students write the unfamiliar words in their notebooks? Or D, test students on vocabulary words weekly? Yes, it's A, using context clues to infer, make inferences. Let's go. And finally, an ELL student is having trouble with idiomatic expressions in an English text. How can the teacher best support the student? Is it A, provide direct translations? B, use pictures and examples? C, encourage the students to skip over those idiomatic expressions? Or D, have the students memorize? You write C and D, get rid of. The answer is B, using pictures and examples. Quick check. To improve reading comprehension, a teacher decides to implement reciprocal teaching. Which of the following roles will the students not take on in this strategy? All right, is it A, summarizer, B, questioner, C, illustrator, or D, predictor? You got it. The answer is C. They will not be taking on the role of illustrator. They summarize, they question, they predict, they generate questions, but they are not drawing pictures. Okay, friends, let's talk about how are we going to help students improve their literal comprehension? This teacher decides to incorporate a new strategy into her reading lessons. Which strategy would be the most effective for this purpose? A, encourage students to use text evidence to support their answers during discussion. B, have students make connections between the text and their personal experiences. C, ask students to visualize scenes from the text and draw illustrations. Or D, use questioning techniques that require students to recall specific details from the text. All right, hopefully you guys remember I said this when I talked about strategies that you can use. Okay, again, the focus here is during the reading. During the reading, we're going to use D, using questioning techniques. All right, friends, well, that is our last question. Don't forget to check out these extra resources that are available for you. The same Zerillo text, CTC practice deck. Reading Rockets has a Reading 101 course. You can also check out my quizzes or with me for a personal session, and we'll go all things RICA. See you next time.